It's not exactly a palace, but the closest we have. Back when the court was in Europe, Maroi royalty used to live in castles. I made a face. You make that sound like a good thing. Stone walls, turrets. You have to admit that sounds pretty neat. Yeah, but I bet they had crap internet access. Lissa shook her head at me, smiling, and didn't dignify my comment with a response. We passed some other buildings that had the same ornate stonework as the others, but were tall and built in a style that reminded me of apartments. She confirmed as much. Those are townhouses, where people who live here year-round stay. I eyed them, wondering what they were like on the inside, and a happy thought came to me. You think that's where we'll live? The thought caught her off guard, but she soon grew just as excited as me. She, too, liked the idea of us having our own place, free to decorate it and come and go as we wanted. I rather liked the idea of Dmitri living with us, too, but here at court, he wouldn't be with her 24/7. For that matter, I actually wouldn't need to be with her 24/7 either. Would they let me live with her? Or would this just be another chance to show I wasn't needed? I hope so, she said, oblivious to my worries. Top floor, with a view. I mustered another smile. And a pool. How can you think about a pool in this weather? Hey, if we're fantasizing here, we might as well go the whole way. I bet Tatiana's got one. I bet she wears a bikini and has hot guys rubbing her down with suntan lotion. I expected another eye roll, but Lissa just grinned as she led me into a building that was near the townhouses. Funny you mention that. What? I exclaimed. She was about ready to burst with her secret. I was this close to pulling it out of her mind. I would have, too, if I hadn't been so stunned by our surroundings. It was sensory overload. Delicate music, fountains, plants, people in white robes, everything gleaming in silver. It was a spa, a full-fledged luxury spa hidden away in an old stone building here at court. Who would have guessed? A long granite receptionist's desk guarded the entrance, so we only had a partial view, but what I could see was pretty sweet. Women sat along a wall getting pedicures and manicures. Maroi men and women were getting haircuts in color. What looked like a maze of halls could just be seen in the back of the salon, with a directory of arrows pointing to other sections: massage, sauna, facials, etc. Lissa grinned at me. What do you think? I think Adrian was right about the court having all sorts of secrets. I gave a mock sigh, and I hate having to admit that he's right. You've been so down about the field experience and other stuff. She didn't have to mention Mason's death and the Strigoi fight. I read it from her mind. I figured you could use a treat. I checked their openings here while you were with the Queen, and they were able to squeeze us in. Lissa walked up to the receptionist and told her who we were. The woman immediately recognized our names, but seemed surprised to be letting a damn peer in. I didn't care, though. I was too bedazzled by the sights and sounds around me. Compared to the harsh, practical lifestyle I usually led, this sort of luxury almost defied belief. After checking in, Lissa turned to me, face eager and radiant. I got us set up to get massages with these. Nails, I interrupted. What? I want my nails done. Can I get a manicure? It was the most exotic, completely useless thing I could imagine. Well, it wasn't useless for ordinary women, but for me, with the way I used my hands and subjected them to blisters, bruises, dirt, and wind, yes, useless. I hadn't painted my nails in ages. There was no reason. Half the nail polish would probably chip off after one practice session. A novice like me couldn't afford that kind of luxury. And that was why I so desperately wanted one. Seeing Lissa wear makeup had awakened that longing in me for some beautification of my own. I accepted that it could never be a regular part of my life, but if I was in a place like this today, then by God I wanted my nails done. Lissa faltered a little. She'd apparently had big plans for this massage thing, but she had a hard time refusing me and spoke to the receptionist again. It sounded like the receptionist had to do a bit of juggling with her schedule, but she said she could make it work. Of course, Princess. She smiled happily, entranced by Lissa's natural charisma. Half the time, Lissa didn't even need Spirit to get people to help her. I don't want to be any inconvenience, Lissa said. No, definitely not. We soon found ourselves sitting at adjacent tables while Maroi women soaked our hands in hot water and started scrubbing them with weird combinations of sugar and seaweed. Why the manicure? Lissa wanted to know. I explained my reasoning to her about how I hardly had time for makeup anymore, and how the abuse my hands went through made any sort of pampering impractical. Her face turned thoughtful. I never thought about that before. I just figured you weren't into it lately. Or, well, that you didn't need it. Not with your looks. Whatever, I said. You're the one guys worship. Because of my name. You're the one that guys, like a certain one we know, actually want for other reasons. Gee, I wondered who she could be referring to. Yeah, but those other reasons aren't very noble. She shrugged. The point's the same. You don't need makeup for them to drool all over you. Then I felt the weirdest thing through the bond. I saw myself through her eyes. It was like looking in a mirror, except she only had a profile view of me. But when she looked at me, she really did think I was beautiful. With my tan and dark brown hair, I seemed exotic to her. She felt pale and washed out compared to me, skinny next to my curves. It was surreal, considering how often I felt scruffy next to her luminous beauty. Her envy wasn't malicious. That wasn't in her nature. It was more wistful, an admiration of a look she could never have. I wanted to reassure her, but had a feeling she didn't want me knowing about her insecurities. Besides, my thoughts were interrupted when the woman doing my nails asked what color I wanted. I picked a color that looked like gold glitter. Gaudy, perhaps, but I actually thought it looked kind of cool, and it wasn't like it was going to last long anyway. Lissa picked pale pink, a color as refined and elegant as she was. Hers got painted a lot faster than mine, though, because my manicurist had to spend so long softening my nails and filing the nails. Lissa finished long before I did. We both had glamorous hands. We proudly held them up side by side. You look gorgeous, darling, she declared, affecting a sophisticated air. Laughing, we went off to the massage area. Lissa had originally scheduled us for extensive massages, but the manicure had cut into a chunk of that time. So we modified the full-body massage into a foot massage, which was just as well, since we couldn't have put on robes or any other changes of clothes with our nails still wet. All we had to do was remove our shoes and roll up our pants. I sat down in a chair while my feet soaked in warm, bubbling water. Someone put something into the tub that smelled like violets, but I didn't pay much attention. I was too entranced by my hands. They were perfect. The manicurist had buffed and hydrated them to silky softness, and my nails had been transformed into gleaming gold ovals. Rose, I heard Lissa say. The lady had also put a clear coat of nail polish over the gold. I wondered if that would give the nails a longer lease on life. Rose! Sensing that Lissa wanted my undivided attention, I finally looked up from my awesome hands. She was grinning from ear to ear. I could feel that excited news burning in her again, the secret she'd had while we'd been walking over here. What's up? I asked. She nodded downward. Rose, this is Ambrose. I glanced absent-mindedly toward the masseuse at my feet. Hey, Ambrose, how's it? I cut myself off before the words holy crap or whoa left my lips. The guy massaging my feet couldn't have been much older than me. He had curly black hair and muscles everywhere. I knew this for a fact because he was shirtless and offered us both a good view of his sculpted pecs and biceps. His deep golden skin was a color achievable only by excessive time in the sun, indicating he was human. The bite marks on his neck confirmed it. A pretty boy feeder. Very pretty. His attractiveness was almost unreal, though. Dmitri was gorgeous, but he had little flaws that made him that much more gorgeous. Ambrose was too perfect, like a piece of art. I didn't want to throw myself into his arms or anything, but he certainly was nice to look at. Lissa, still worried about my love life, had apparently thought this was exactly what I needed. Her masseuse was female. It's very nice to meet you, Rose, said Ambrose. He had a musical voice. It's nice to meet you, too, I said, suddenly self-conscious as he lifted my feet out of the water and toweled them off. I was especially self-conscious of the appearance of my feet. They weren't gross or anything, since they weren't usually exposed to the elements like my hands. I just kind of wished they'd been polished up too if this male model was going to handle them so much. Lissa, astute enough to sense me being flustered, could barely stop from laughing. I heard her thoughts in my head. Cute, huh? I cut her a look, refusing to voice my thoughts out loud. He's Tatiana's personal masseuse. That practically makes you royalty. I sighed loudly to let her know she wasn't as funny as she thought she was. And when I say personal, I mean personal. I jerked in surprise, accidentally kicking one of my feet out. Ambrose's deft hands caught it before I hit him in his pretty face, thankfully. I might not have been able to communicate telepathically, but I was pretty sure there could be no question to Lissa that the look on my face said, "You can't be serious, because if you are, you're in big trouble." Her grin widened. I thought you'd like that, pampered by the Queen's secret lover. Pampered wasn't exactly the word that came to mind. Looking at Ambrose's young, beautiful features, I just couldn't picture him getting it on with that old hag. Of course, that denial might have just been my brain's way of refusing to acknowledge that someone who had touched her was now touching me. You. Ambrose's hands were checking out my calves along with my feet, and he struck up a conversation about what elegant legs I had. His dazzling white smile never left his face, but most of my answers were curt. I still couldn't get over the thought of him and Tatiana together. Silently, Lissa groaned. "He's flirting with you, Rose," she thought to me. "What are you doing? You can do better than that. I went to all this trouble to get you the hottest guy here, and this is what I get?" This one-sided conversation thing was becoming a pain in the ass. I wanted to tell her that I'd never asked for her to rent out this guy for me. In fact, I suddenly had images of the Queen calling me in for another meeting to yell at me for having a non-existent affair with Ambrose, too. Wouldn't that be perfect? Ambrose continued smiling as he rubbed the soles of one foot with his thumbs. It hurt, but in a good way. I hadn't realized how sore that spot was. "They go to so much trouble to make sure you wear the right black and white clothes, but no one ever thinks about your feet," he mused. "How are you supposed to stand around all day and still manage roundhouse kicks and cat stances in bad shoes?" I was about to tell him that he really didn't need to keep worrying about my feet, but something odd suddenly struck me. Roundhouse kicks and cat stances weren't top-secret Guardian terms, Anyone could Google martial arts and find out about those kinds of things. Still, it wasn't the kind of topic I'd expect a Moroi to casually throw around, let alone a feeder. I studied Ambrose closer, noting the way his dark eyes so carefully darted around and observed everything. I recalled his fast reflexes in stopping my kick. I felt my jaw start to drop, and I shut it before I looked like an idiot. "You're a Dampier," I breathed. Chapter 16. "So are you," he teased. "Yeah, but I just thought—" "That I was human? Because of the bite marks?" "Yeah," I admitted. No point in lying. "We all have to survive," he said. "And Dampiers are good at figuring out ways to." "Yeah, but most of us become guardians," I pointed out. "Especially men." I still couldn't believe he was a Dampier, or that I hadn't spotted it right away. Long ago, Dampiers had been born from humans and Moroi getting together. We were half vampire, half human. Over time, Moroi started keeping themselves separate from humans. Humans grew too plentiful and no longer needed Moroi for magic. Moroi now feared they'd become human experiments if ever discovered. So no more Dampiers were being made that way. And in a bizarre genetic twist, Dampiers getting together with Dampiers couldn't make more Dampiers. The only way my race kept reproducing was through Moroi mixing with Dampiers. Normal logic would make you think that a Dampier and a Moroi would make children who were 3/4 Moroi. Nope. We came out with perfect Dampier genes, half and half, mixing some of the best traits of both races. Most Dampiers came from Dampier women and Moroi men. For centuries, these women had set their kids off to be raised somewhere else, so that the mothers could go back to being guardians. That's what mine had done. Over time, though, some Dampier women had decided they wanted to raise their children themselves. They refused to be guardians, and instead banded together in communities. That's what Dimitri's mother had done. Lots of ugly rumors surrounded these women because Moroi men often visited in the hopes of getting cheap sex. Dimitri had told me that a lot of these stories were exaggerated, and that most Dampier women weren't that easy. The rumors came from the fact that these women were almost always single mothers who had no contact with their kids' fathers, and because some Dampiers would let Moroi drink blood during sex. It was a kinky, dirty thing in our culture, and was where the nickname for these non-guardian Dampiers had come from. Blood whores. But I'd never even thought about a male blood whore. My mind was reeling. "Most guys who don't want to be guardians just run off," I said. It was rare, but it happened. Guys bailed on guardian school and disappeared to hide out among humans. It was another disgraceful thing. "I didn't want to run off," said Ambrose, seeming very cheerful about all this. "But I didn't want to fight Strigoi either, so I did this." Beside me, Lissa was stunned. Blood whores stayed on the fringes of our world. Having one right in front of her, a guy, no less, was incredible. "This is better than being a guardian?" I asked in disbelief. "Well, let's see. Guardians spend all their time watching out for others, risking their lives, and wearing bad shoes. Me? I have great shoes, am currently massaging a pretty girl, and sleep in an awesome bed." I made a face. "Let's not talk about where you sleep, okay?" "And giving blood isn't as bad as you think. I don't give as much as a feeder, but the high's pretty neat." "Let's not talk about that either," I said. No way would I admit that I knew Moroi bites were indeed pretty neat. "Fine, but say what you want. My life's good." He gave me a lopsided smile. "But aren't people aren't they mean to you? They must say things." "Oh, yes," he agreed. Horrible things. I get called a lot of ugly names. But you know where I get the most grief from? Other Dampiers. Moroi tend to leave me alone. That's because they don't understand what it's like to be a guardian, how important it is. It occurred to me with some unease that I sounded exactly like my mother. It's what Dampiers are meant to do. Ambrose rose, unlinking his legs and giving me a face full of muscled chest. You sure? How would you like to find out what you're really meant to do? I know someone who might be able to tell you. Ambrose, don't do it, groaned Lyssa's manicurist. That woman's crazy. She's psychic, Eve. She's not psychic. And you cannot take the Dragomir princess to go see her. The queen herself goes to her for advice, he argued back. That's a mistake, too, grumbled Eve. Lyssa and I exchanged looks. She'd latched onto the word psychic. Psychics and fortune-tellers were generally regarded with the same disbelief as ghosts, except that Lyssa and I had recently learned that psychic abilities we'd previously believed to be fantasy were actually a part of spirit. Hope that she might have stumbled onto another spirit user shot through Lyssa. We'd love to see a psychic. Can we go, please? Lyssa glanced at a nearby clock. And soon we have a flight to catch. Eve clearly thought it was a waste of our time, but Ambrose could hardly wait to show us. We put our shoes back on and were led out of the massage area. The spa rooms had been in a maze of halls behind the front salon, and we soon found ourselves in another maze that was farther back still. There's no directory here, I said as we walked past closed doors. What are these rooms for? Everything and anything people will pay money for, he said. Like what? Ah, Rose, you're such an innocent. We finally reached a door at the end of the hall. We stepped inside and found a small room that only held a desk. A closed door sat beyond it. A Moroi at the desk looked up, obviously recognizing Ambrose. He walked over to her, and the two got into a quiet argument as he tried to get her to let us in. Lyssa turned to me, keeping her voice soft. What do you think? My eyes were on Ambrose. That all that muscle's going to waste. Forget the blood whore thing already. I mean about this psychic. Do you think we've found another spirit user? She asked eagerly. If a party boy like Adrian can be a spirit user, then a woman who tells the future probably can be too. Ambrose returned to us, grinning. Suzanne was happy to fit you into the schedule before your flight. It'll just be a minute while Rhonda finishes up with her current client. Suzanne didn't look very happy about fitting us in, but I didn't have time to ponder that because the inner door opened, and an older Moroi man walked out. Entranced. He gave Suzanne some cash, nodded at the rest of us, and left. Ambrose stood and made a wise sweeping motion toward the door. Your turn. Lyssa and I walked inside the other room. Ambrose followed and closed the door behind us. It was like walking into someone's heart. Everything was red. Plush red carpet, a red velvet couch, velvet brocade wallpaper, and red satin cushions on the floor. Sitting on the cushions was a Moroi in her 40s, with curly black hair and equally dark eyes. There was a very faint olive cast to her skin, but her overall look was pale, like all Moroi. Her black clothing stood out in stark contrast to the red room, and jewelry the color of my nails gleamed on her neck and hands. I expected her to speak in a spooky, mysterious voice, one with an accent, but her words sounded blandly American. Please, sit down. She pointed to some cushions across from her. Ambrose sat on the couch. Who have you brought? She asked him as Lyssa and I settled down. Princess Vasilisa Dragomir, and her guardian-to-be, Rose. They need a fast fortune." "Why do you always want to rush these things?" Rhonda asked. "Hey, it's not me. They have a plane to catch." "It'd be the same if you didn't. You're always in a rush." I shook off my awe of the room enough to pay attention to their easy banter and similar hair. "Are you guys related?" "This is my aunt," said Ambrose fondly. "She adores me." Rhonda rolled her eyes. That was a surprise. Dampiers rarely had contact with their extended Morroy family, but then Ambrose was hardly normal. Lissa was intrigued by all of this too, but her interest was different from mine. She was studying Rhonda intently, trying to find any indication that the woman might be a spirit user. "Are you a gypsy?" I asked. Rhonda made a face and began shuffling some cards. "I'm Roma," she said. "A lot of people call us gypsies, though the term isn't exactly accurate, and really I'm Morroy first." She gave the cards a few more shuffles, then handed them to Lissa. "Cut, please." Lissa was still staring, half hoping she might see an aura. Adrian could sense other spirit users, but she didn't have that skill yet. She cut the cards and handed them back. Rhonda put the deck back together and dealt out 3 cards to Lissa. I leaned forward. Cool. They were tarot cards. I didn't know much about them, only that they supposedly had mystical powers and could tell the future. I didn't believe in that stuff much more than I'd ever believed in religion, but then, until recently, I'd never really believed in ghosts either. The 3 cards were the Moon, the Empress, and the Ace of Cups. Ambrose leaned over my shoulder to peer at the cards. "Ooh," he said. "Very interesting." Rhonda glanced up at him. "Hush, you don't know what you're talking about." She turned back to the cards and tapped the Ace of Cups. "You're on the verge of a new beginning, a rebirth of great power and emotion. Your life will change, but it will be a change that takes you in a direction that, while difficult, will ultimately illuminate the world." "Whoa," I said. Rhonda then pointed to the Empress. "Power and leadership lie ahead of you, which you will handle with grace and intelligence. The seeds are already in place, though there's an edge of uncertainty, an enigmatic set of influences that hang around you like mist." Her attention was on the moon as she said those words. "But my overall impression is that those unknown factors won't deter you from your destiny." Lissa's eyes were wide. "You can tell that just from the cards?" Rhonda shrugged. "It's in the cards, yes. But I also have a gift that lets me see forces beyond what ordinary people can perceive." She shuffled the cards again and then handed them to me to cut. I did, and she flipped 3 more over. The 9 of Swords, the Sun, and the Ace of Swords. The Sun card was upside down. Now, I knew nothing about this stuff, but I immediately got the feeling I was about to get a raw deal compared to Lissa. The Empress card had shown a woman in a long dress with stars on her head. The moon had shown a full moon with 2 dogs below it, and the Ace of Cups had shown a bejeweled chalice filled with flowers. Meanwhile, my 9 of Swords showed a woman sobbing in front of a wall of swords, and the Ace of Swords was a boring hand holding a plain iron sword. The Sun at least looked cheerful. It had what looked like an angel riding a white horse with a brilliant sun shining above. "Shouldn't that be flipped right side up?" I asked. "No," she said, eyes on the cards. After several moments of heavy silence, she said, "You will destroy that which is undead." I waited about 30 seconds for her to continue, but she didn't. "Wait, that's it?" She nodded. "That's what the cards say to me." I pointed at them. Seems like they've got a little bit more to say than that. You gave Lissa a whole encyclopedia worth of information. And I already know I'm going to kill the undead. That's my job. Bad enough I'd gotten a minuscule fortune. It was also totally unoriginal. Rhonda shrugged, as though that were some sort of explanation. I started to say that she'd better not even think about charging me for that crap reading when there was a soft knock at the door. It opened, and to my surprise, Dmitri stuck his head inside. His eyes fell on Lissa and me. "Ah, they said you were in here." He walked in and noticed Rhonda. To my further surprise, he gave her a low nod of respect and said very politely, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to bring these two to their flight." Rhonda examined him, but not in a checking him out kind of way. It was more like he was a mystery she wanted to figure out. "There's nothing to apologize for, but maybe you've got time for a reading of your own?" With our similar views on religion, I expected Dmitri to tell her he had no time for her scam artist fortune-telling. Yet the look on his face stayed serious, and he finally nodded, sitting down beside me, letting me smell the sweet scent of leather and aftershave. "Thank you." His words were still perfectly polite. "I'll be brief." Rhonda was already shuffling up my useless cards. In record time, she had them ready for cutting and had dealt out 3 cards in front of Dmitri. The Knight of Rods, the Wheel of Fortune, and the 5 of Cups. I couldn't get a feel for these. The Knight of Rods was what it sounded like, a man on horseback with a long wooden spear. The Wheel of Fortune was a circle with strange symbols floating in the clouds. The 5 of Cups showed 5 knocked-over cups spilling some kind of liquid out while a man stood with his back to them. Her eyes flicked over the cards, looked at Dmitri, then looked back at the cards. Her expression was blank. "You will lose what you value most, so treasure it while you can." She pointed to the Wheel of Fortune card. "The wheel is turning, always turning." The reading wasn't as good as Lissa's, but he'd gotten a hell of a lot more than me. Lissa elbowed me in a silent warning to be quiet, which startled me at first. Without even realizing it, I'd opened my mouth to protest. I shut it and glowered. Dimitri's face was dark and thoughtful as he stared at the cards. I didn't know if he knew anything about this stuff, but he was staring at the images as though they really held all the secrets of the world. At last, he gave Rhonda another respectful nod. "Thank you." She nodded back, and then the 3 of us rose to catch our flight. Ambrose told us the readings were on him, and he'd settle up with Suzanne afterward. "It was worth it," he told me. "Worth it to see you think twice about your fate." I scoffed. No offense, but those cards didn't make me think much about anything. Like everything else, this just made him laugh. We were about to leave Suzanne's little waiting room when Lissa suddenly dashed back to Rhonda's open doorway. I followed after her. Excuse me?" Lissa said. Rhonda looked up from more shuffling, her face troubled. "Yes?" "This is going to sound weird, but, could you tell me what element you specialized in?" I could feel Lissa holding her breath. She so wanted Rhonda to say she hadn't specialized, which was often the sign of having spirit. There was still so much to learn, and Lissa loved the ideas of finding others who could teach her. And she especially loved the idea of someone teaching her to foretell the future. "Air," said Rhonda. A soft breeze rustled through our hair to prove the point. "Why?" Lissa let go of her breath, disappointment washing over me through her link. "No reason. Thank you again." Chapter 17. Out on the runway, Christian stood near the entrance to the plane, along with a few of the other guardians. Lissa ran off to talk to him, leaving me and Dmitri alone. He hadn't said a word the entire way back from the spa. Strong and silent were typical behaviors for him, but something about his mood struck me as unusual this time. "Are you still thinking about what Rhonda said? That woman's a total scam."
"Why do you say that?" he asked, stopping not far from where the others stood.
A sharp wind blasted us all in the face, and I hoped we could board soon. "Because she didn't tell us anything. You should have heard my future. It was like one sentence stating the obvious." "Lissa had a better fortune," I admitted, "but it wasn't really anything that profound. Rhonda had said she'd be a great leader. I mean, seriously, how hard is that to figure out?" Dmitri smiled at me.
"Would you be a believer if she'd given you a more interesting reading?"
"Maybe if it was good." When he just laughed, I asked, "But you're taking it seriously. Why? You really believe in that kind of stuff?"
"It's not so much that I believe, or that I don't believe."
He wore a black knit cap over his head today and tugged it down to better cover his ears.
"I just respect people like her. They have access to knowledge other people don't."
"She's not a spirit user, though, so I'm not really sure where she's getting this knowledge. I still think she's a con artist."
"She's a Vradator, actually."
I wasn't even going to touch that one. A what? Is that Russian?"
"Romanian. It means, well, there's no real translation. Witch is close, but that's not right. Their idea of a witch isn't the same as an American's."
I had never expected to have a conversation like this with him. I just didn't think of Dmitri as the superstitious type. For half a moment, I thought that if he could believe in something like witches and fortune-tellers, maybe he could handle me seeing ghosts. I considered saying something to him, but promptly decided against it. I wouldn't have had a chance to say anything anyway, because Dmitri kept talking.
"My grandmother was like Rhonda," he explained. "That is, she practiced the same kind of arts. Personality-wise, they're very different."
"Your grandmother was whatever?"
"It's called something else in Russian, but yes, same meaning. She used to read cards and give advice, too. It was how she made her living."
I bit off any comments about frauds. Was she right in her predictions?
"Sometimes. Don't look at me like that."
"Like what?"
"You've got this look on your face that says you think I'm delusional, but you're too nice to say anything."
"Delusional's kind of harsh. I'm just surprised, that's all. I never expected you to buy into this stuff."
"Well, I grew up with it, so it doesn't seem that strange to me. And like I said, I'm not sure I buy into it 100%.
Adrian had joined the group by the plane and was protesting loudly about us not being able to board yet. "I never thought of you as having a grandmother either," I told Dmitri. "I mean, obviously you'd have to, but still, it's just weird to think about growing up with one." Contact with my own mother was rare enough, and I'd never even met any of my other family members. "Was it weird having a witch grandma? Scary? Was she always, threatening to cast spells if you were bad?"
"Most of the time she just threatened to send me to my room."
"Well, that doesn't sound scary to me."
"That's because you haven't met her."
I noted the wording. "Is she still alive?" He nodded.
"Yeah. It'll take more than old age to kill her off. She's tough. She was actually a guardian for a while."
"Really?" Much like with Ambrose, my fixed ideas about Dampiers, guardians, and blood whores were getting muddled. "So she gave it up to become to stay with her kids?"
"She has very strong ideas about family. Ideas that probably sound kind of sexist to you. She believes all Dampiers should train and put in time as guardians, but that the women should eventually return home to raise their children together.
But not the men.
No, he said wryly. She thinks men still need to stay out there and kill Strigoi.
Wow. I remembered Dmitri telling me a little about his family. His father had popped back every so often, but that was about it for men in his life. All of his siblings were sisters, and honestly, the idea didn't sound so sexist. I had the same ideas about men going off to fight, which was why meeting Ambrose had been so weird. You were the one who had to go. The women in your family kicked you out.
Hardly, he laughed. My mother would take me back in a second if I wanted to come home.
He was smiling, like it was a joke, but I saw something in his eyes that looked a lot like homesickness. It was gone in a flash, though, as Dmitri turned around when Adrian started whooping about how we could finally board. When we were settled on the plane, Lissa could hardly wait to tell her friends about the news. She started off with how I'd been called in to see the Queen. That wasn't a topic I'd want to discuss, but she pushed forward, excited that the Queen had wanted to praise me. Everyone seemed impressed except Adrian. The look on his face told me that he was sure that she most definitely hadn't called me in for that. However, there was enough of a puzzled look in his eyes to make me think he had no clue about the real reason. It was about time I knew something he didn't. I had a feeling he would have been as shocked by the idea of him hooking up with Lissa as I'd been. Lissa then told him about the offer to live at court and to go to college at Lehigh. I still can't believe it, she mused. It sounds too good to be true. Adrian knocked back a glass of what looked like whiskey. How had he gotten a hold of that so soon?
Coming from my great-aunt? It is too good to be true.
What do you mean? I asked. After being accused of being engaged in a fictitious romance by Tatiana and finding out she had a Dampier lover/feeder, nothing about her would surprise me anymore. Is Lissa in trouble?
What, bodily? Nah. It's just my great-aunt doesn't do things out of the kindness of her heart. Well, Adrian amended. Sometimes she does. She's not a total bitch. And I think she means it about worrying about the Dragomirs. I've heard she liked your parents. But as to why she's doing this, I don't know. You've got radical ideas. Maybe she does want to hear different opinions. Or maybe she wants to keep an eye on you. Keep you from causing trouble.
Or maybe she wants to marry Lissa off to you, I silently added. Christian didn't like any of this.
He's right. They could be trying to rein you in. You should go live with Aunt Tasha. You don't have to go to a Moroi school.
But she'll be safer if she does, I admitted. I was all for fighting the system and keeping Lissa away from royal plans. But if she went to a college that wasn't one the Moroi protected, she'd be in danger, and I certainly didn't want that either. I started to add more, but just then the plane took off. As soon as it was up in the air, my headache from yesterday returned. It was like all the air around us pressing on my skull. Son of a bitch, I groaned, putting my hand on my forehead. You're sick again? Asked Lissa, worried. I nodded.
Have you always had trouble flying? Asked Adrian, gesturing for someone to refill his drink.
Never, I said. Damn it, I don't want to go through this again. I gritted my teeth and tried to ignore the pain, as well as those black shapes again. It took some effort, but if I focused hard enough, I actually got it all to lessen a little. Weird. Still, I didn't want to talk much after that, and everyone left me alone. The college conversation dropped off. Hours passed. It was almost time to arrive back at the academy. One of the Moroi flight attendants walked down the aisle to our group, a frown on her face. Alberta instantly snapped to attention. "What's wrong?" "An ice storm just blew through the area," the flight attendant said. "We can't land at St. Vladimir's because the runway isn't accessible with the ice and winds. We need fuel, however, so we're going to land at Martinville Regional. It's a small airport a few hours away by car, but they weren't affected as much. Our plan is to land there, refuel, and then fly into the academy once they've cleared the runway. It's less than an hour by air." It was annoying news, but it didn't sound too bad. Besides, what could we do? At the very least, I'd get some relief soon. If my headache behaved like before, it'd go away when we were on the ground. We settled back into our seats and put on our belts, readying for the landing. The weather looked miserable outside, but the pilot was good and landed with no difficulties. And that's when it happened. As soon as we touched the ground, my world exploded. The headache didn't go away. It got worse, much worse, and I hadn't thought that it was possible. It felt like my entire skull was being ripped open. But that was just the beginning, because suddenly, all around me, were faces. Ghostly, translucent faces, and bodies, just like Mason's. And oh God, they were everywhere. I couldn't even see the seats or my friends, just those faces and their hands, pale, shining hands reached out for me, mouths open like they would speak, and all of those faces looked as though they wanted something from me. And the more they came at me, the more of them I started to recognize. I saw Victor's guardians, the ones who had been killed when we'd rescued Lissa. Their eyes were wide and terrified. Over what? Were they reliving their deaths? Mixed in with them were children I didn't recognize right away. Then I knew. They were the ones Dmitri and I had found dead after a Strigoi massacre. These children had the same washed-out look Mason had, but their necks were covered in blood, just as they'd been at the house. Its scarlet hue stood out in stark contrast to their shadowy, luminescent bodies. Thicker and thicker the faces grew. While none of them actually spoke, there seemed to be a buzzing in my ears that grew louder as more and more of them came. 3 new figures joined the crowd. They should have blended into the rest, but they stood out almost as sharply as the blood on the children's necks had. It was Lissa's family. Her mother, her father, and her brother Andre. They looked exactly as they had the last time I'd seen them, just before the car accident. Blonde, beautiful, regal. Like Mason, they wore no marks of their deaths, even though I knew the crash had done horrible things to them. And like Mason, they just stared at me with sad eyes, not speaking but clearly wanting to say something. Only, unlike with Mason, I understood the message. There was a large patch of blackness behind Andre that was steadily growing bigger. He pointed at me, and then he pointed at it. I knew, without understanding how I knew, that it was the entrance to the world of death, the world I had come back from. Andre, who'd been my age when he died, pointed again. His parents joined him. They didn't have to speak for me to know what they were saying. You shouldn't have lived. You needed to come back with us. I started screaming and screaming. I thought someone on the plane was talking to me, but I couldn't be sure. Not when I couldn't see anything but those faces, hands, and the blackness behind Andre. Every so often Mason's face materialized nearby, solemn and sad. I appealed to him for help. "Make them go away," I yelled. "Make them go away." But there was nothing he would or could do. Frantically, I undid my seatbelt and tried to stand up. The ghosts didn't touch me, but they were all too close, still reaching and pointing with skeletal hands. I waved my arms to fend them off, screaming for someone to help me and make this all stop. There was no help for me, though. No help for all those hands and hollow eyes, or the pain that consumed me. It grew so bad that glittering black spots began to dance across my field of vision. I had a feeling I was going to pass out, and I welcomed that. It would make the pain go away and save me from the faces. The spots grew bigger and bigger, and soon I could no longer see anything. The faces disappeared, and so did the pain as sweet black waters dragged me under. Chapter 18. Everything became fuzzy after that. I had vague impressions of moving in and out of consciousness, of people saying my name, and of being in the air again. Eventually, I woke up in the school's infirmary and found Dr. Olensky looking down at me. "Hello, Rose," she said. She was a middle-aged Moroi and had often joked that I was her #1 patient. "How are you feeling?" The details of what had happened came back. The faces, Mason, the other ghosts, the terrible pain in my head. All of it was gone. "Fine," I said, half surprised to be saying those words. For a moment, I wondered if maybe it had all been a dream. Then I looked beyond her and saw Dmitri and Alberta looming nearby. The looks on their faces told me the events on the plane had indeed been real. Alberta cleared her throat, and Dr. Olensky glanced back. "May we?" Alberta asked. The doctor nodded, and the other two stepped forward. Dmitri, as always, was a balm to me. No matter what happened, I always felt a little safer in his presence. Yet even he hadn't been able to stop what had happened at the airport. When he looked at me like he was now, with an expression of such tenderness and concern, it triggered mixed feelings. Part of me loved that he cared so much. The other part wanted to be strong for him and didn't want to make him worry. "Rose?" began Alberta uncertainly. I could tell that she had no clue how to go about this. What had happened was beyond her realm of experience. Dmitri took over. "Rose, what happened back there?" Before I could utter a word, he cut me off. "And do not say it was nothing this time." Well, if I couldn't fall back on that answer, then I didn't know what to say. Dr. Olensky pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "We only want to help you." "I don't need any help," I said. "I'm fine." I sounded just like Brandon and Brett. I was probably only one step away from saying, "I fell." Alberta finally regained herself. "You were fine when we were in the air. When we landed, you were most definitely not fine." "I'm fine now," I repeated stonily, not meeting her eyes. "What happened then?" she asked. "Why the screaming? What did you mean when you said we needed to make them go away?" I briefly considered my other fallback answer, the one about stress. That sounded completely stupid now. So, again, I said nothing. To my surprise, I felt tears build up in my eyes. "Rose," murmured Dmitri, voice as soft as silk against my skin. "Please." Something in that cracked me. It was so hard for me to stand against him. I turned my head and stared at the ceiling. "Ghosts," I whispered. "I saw ghosts." None of them had expected that. But honestly, how could they have? Heavy silence fell. Finally, Dr. Olensky spoke in a faltering voice. What do you mean? I swallowed. He's been following me for the last couple of weeks. Mason. On campus. I know it sounds crazy, but it's him. Or his ghost. That's what happened with Stan. I locked up because Mason was there, and I didn't know what to do. On the plane, I think he was there too, and others. But I couldn't exactly see them when we were in the air. Just glimpses, and the headache. But when we landed in Martinville, he was there in full form, and he wasn't alone. There were others with him. Other ghosts. A tear escaped from my eye, and I hastily wiped at it, hoping none of them had seen it. I waited then, not sure what to expect. Would someone laugh? Tell me I was crazy? Accuse me of lying and demand to know what had really happened? Did you know them? Dmitri asked finally. I turned back and actually met his eyes. They were still serious and concerned. No mockery. Yeah. I saw some of Victor's guardians, and the people from the massacre. Lys's family was there too. Nobody said anything after that. They all just sort of exchanged glances, hoping perhaps that one of the others might shed light on all this. Dr. Olensky sighed. Could I speak with the two of you privately? The three of them stepped out of the examining room, shutting the door behind them, only it didn't quite catch. Scrambling off the bed, I crossed the room and stood by the door. The tiny crack was just enough for my Dampier hearing to pick up the conversation. I felt bad about eavesdropping, but they were talking about me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my future was on the line here. Obviously, what's going on? Hissed Dr. Olensky. It was the first time I'd ever heard her sound so irate. With patience, she was the picture of serenity. It was hard to imagine her angry, but she was clearly pissed off now. That poor girl. She's undergoing post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's no wonder after everything that's happened. Are you sure? Asked Alberta. Maybe it's something else. But as her words trailed off, I could tell she didn't really know of anything else that would explain it. Look at the facts. A teenage girl who witnessed one of her friends getting killed, and then had to kill his killer. You don't think that's traumatic? You don't think that might have had the tiniest effect on her? Tragedy is something all guardians have to deal with, said Alberta. Maybe there's not much to be done for guardians in the field, but Rose is still a student here. There are resources that can help her. Like what? Asked Dmitri. He sounded curious and concerned, not like he was challenging her. Counseling. Talking to someone about what happened can do worlds of good. You should have done that as soon as she got back. You should do it for the others who were with her while you're at it. Why doesn't anyone think of these things? It's a good idea, said Dmitri. I recognized the tone in his voice. His mind was spinning. She could do it on her day off. Day off? More like every day. You should pull her from this entire field experience. Fake Strigoi attacks are not the way to recover from the real one. No! I had pushed open the door before I realized it. They all stared at me, and I immediately felt stupid. I'd just busted myself for spying. Rose, said Dr. Olensky, returning to her caring but slightly chastising doctor mode. You should go lie down. I'm fine, and you can't make me quit the field experience. I won't graduate if you do. You aren't well, Rose, and there's nothing to be ashamed of after what's happened to you. Thinking you're seeing the ghost of someone who died isn't too out there when you consider the circumstances. I started to correct her on the thinking you're seeing part, but then bit it off. Arguing that I'd really seen a ghost wasn't probably going to do me any favors, I decided, even if I was starting to believe that was exactly what I was seeing. Frantically, I tried to think of a convincing reason to stay in the field experience. I was usually pretty good at talking myself out of bad situations. Unless you're going to put me in counseling 24/7, you're just going to make it worse. I need something to do. Most of my classes are on hold right now. What would I do? Sit around? Think more and more about what happened? I'll go crazy, for real. I don't want to sit on the past forever. I need to get moving with my future. This threw them into an argument about what to do with me. I listened, biting my tongue, knowing I needed to stay out of it. Finally, with some grumbling from the doctor, they all decided I would go on half-time for the field experience. It proved to be the ideal compromise for everyone. Well, except me. I just wanted life to go on exactly as it had. Still, I knew this was probably as good a deal as I'd get. They decided that I'd do 3 days of field experience a week, with no night duties. During the other days, I'd have to do some training and whatever bookwork they dug up for me. I'd also have to see a counselor, which I wasn't thrilled about. It wasn't that I had anything against counselors. Lissa had been seeing one, and it had really been useful for her. Talking things out helped. It was just, well, this was just something I didn't want to talk about. But if it came down to this, or being kicked out of the field experience, I was more than happy to go with this. Alberta felt they could still justify passing me on half-time. She also liked the idea of having counseling going on at the same time I was dealing with fake Strigoi attacks, just in case they really were traumatizing. After a bit more examination, Dr. Olensky gave me a clean bill of health and told me I could go back to my dorm. Alberta left after that, but Dmitri stuck around to walk me back. Thanks for thinking of the half-time thing, I told him. The walkways were wet today because the weather had warmed up after the storm. It wasn't bathing suit weather or anything, but a lot of the ice and snow were melting. Water dripped steadily from the trees, and we had to sidestep puddles. Dmitri came to an abrupt stop and turned so that he stood right in front of me, blocking my path. I skidded to a halt, nearly running into him. He reached out and grabbed my arm, pulling me closer to him than I would have expected him to do in public. His fingers bit deep into me, but they didn't hurt. "Rose," he said, the pain in his voice making my heart stop. "This shouldn't have been the first time I heard about this. Why didn't you tell me? Do you know what it was like? Do you know what it was like for me to see you like that and not know what was happening? Do you know how scared I was?" I was stunned, both from his outburst and our proximity. I swallowed, unable to speak at first. There was so much on his face, so many emotions. I couldn't recall the last time I'd seen that much of him on display. It was wonderful and frightening at the same time. I then said the stupidest thing possible. "You're not scared of anything." "I'm scared of lots of things. I was scared for you." He released me, and I stepped back. There was still passion and worry written all over him. "I'm not perfect. I'm not invulnerable." "I know, it's just—" I didn't know what to say. He was right. I always saw Dmitri as larger than life, all-knowing, invincible. It was hard for me to believe that he could worry about me so much. "And this has been going on for a long time, too," he added. "It was going on with Stan. When you were talking to Father Andrew about ghosts, you were dealing with it this whole time. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you tell Lissa? Or me?" I stared into those dark, dark eyes, those eyes I loved. would you have believed me?"
He frowned. "Believed what?"
"That I'm seeing ghosts."
"Well, they aren't ghosts, Rose. You only think they are because—"
"That's why," I interrupted. "That's why I couldn't tell you or anybody. Nobody would believe me. Not without thinking I'm crazy."
"I don't think you're crazy,"
he said.
"But I think you've been through a lot."
Adrian had said the exact same thing when I asked him how I could tell if I was crazy or not. "It's more than that," I said. I started walking again. Without even taking another step, he reached out and grabbed me once more. He pulled me back to him, so that we now stood even closer than before. I glanced uneasily around again, wondering if someone might see us, but the campus was deserted. It was early, not quite sunset, so early that most people probably weren't even up for the school day yet. We wouldn't see activity around here for at least another hour. Still, I was surprised to see Dmitri was still risking it.
"Tell me then,"
he said.
"Tell me how it's more than that."
"You won't believe me," I said. "Don't you get it? No one will. Even you, of all people." Something in that thought made my voice catch. Dmitri understood so much about me. I needed him to understand this too.
"I'll try. But I still don't think you really understand what's happening to you."
"I do," I said firmly. "That's what no one realizes. Look, you have to decide once and for all if you really do trust me. If you think I'm a child, too naive to get what's going on with her fragile mind, then you should just keep walking. But if you trust me enough to remember that I've seen things and know things that kind of surpass those of others my age, well, then you should also realize that I might know a little about what I'm talking about." A lukewarm breeze, damp with the scent of melted snow, swirled around us.
"I do trust you, Rosa. But I don't believe in ghosts."
The earnestness was there. He did want to reach out to me, to understand. But even as he did, it warred with beliefs he wasn't ready to change yet. It was ironic, considering tarot cards apparently spooked him. "Will you try to?" I asked. "Or at the very least, try not to write this off as some psychosis?"
"Yes, that I can do."
So I told him about my first couple of Mason sightings, and how I'd been afraid to explain the Stan incident to anyone. I talked about the shapes I'd seen on the plane, and described in more detail what I'd seen on the ground. "Doesn't it seem kind of, specific for a random stress reaction?" I asked when I finished.
"I don't know that you can really expect stress reactions to be random or specific. They're unpredictable by nature."
He had that thoughtful expression I knew so well, the one that told me he was turning over all sorts of things in his head. I could also tell that he still wasn't buying this as a real ghost story, but that he was trying very hard to keep an open mind. He affirmed as much a moment later.
"Why are you so certain these aren't just things you're imagining?"
"Well, at first I thought I was imagining it all, but now, I don't know. There's something about it that feels real, even though I know it isn't actually evidence. But you heard what Father Andrew said about ghosts sticking around after they die young or violently." Dmitri actually bit his lip. He'd been about to tell me not to take the priest literally. Instead, he asked,
"So do you think Mason's back for revenge?"
"I thought that at first, but now I'm not so sure. He's never tried to hurt me. He just seems like he wants something, and then all those other ghosts seem to want something too, even the ones I didn't know. Why?" Dmitri gave me a sage look.
"You have a theory?"
"I do. I was thinking about what Victor said. He mentioned that because I'm shadow-kissed, because I died, I have a connection to the world of the dead, that I'll never entirely leave it behind me. His expression hardened. I wouldn't put a lot of stock in what Victor Dashkov tells you. But he knows things. You know he does, no matter how big an asshole he is. Okay, supposing that's true, that being shadow-kissed lets you see ghosts, why is this happening now? Why didn't it happen right after the car accident? I thought of that, I said eagerly. It was something else Victor said, that now that I was dealing in death, I was that much closer to the other side. What if causing someone else's death strengthened my connection and now makes this possible? I just had my first real kill. Kills, even. Why is it so haphazard? Asked Dmitri. Why does it occur when it does? Why the airplane? Why not court? My enthusiasm dimmed a little. What are you, a lawyer? I snapped. You question everything I'm saying. I thought you were going to have an open mind. I am, but you need to, too. Think about it. Why this pattern of sightings? I don't know, I admitted. I sagged in defeat. You still think I'm crazy. He reached out and cupped my chin, tipping my face up to look at his. No, never. Not one of these theories makes me think you're crazy. But I've always believed the simplest explanation makes sense. Dr. Olensky's does. The ghost one has holes. But if you can find out more, then we may have something to work with. We? I asked. Of course. I'm not leaving you alone on this, no matter what. You know I'd never abandon you. There was something very sweet and noble about his words, and I felt the need to return them, though mostly I ended up sounding idiotic. And I won't ever abandon you, you know. I mean it. Not that this stuff ever happens to you, of course, but if you start seeing ghosts or anything, I'll help you through it. He gave a small, soft laugh. Thanks. Our hands found each other's, fingers lacing together. We stood like that for almost a full minute, neither of us saying anything. The only place we touched was our hands. The breeze picked up again, and although the temperature was probably only in the 40s, it felt like spring to me. I expected flowers to burst into bloom around us. As though sharing the same thought, we released our hands at the same time. We reached my dorm shortly after that, and Dmitri asked if I'd be okay going in on my own. I told him I'd be fine, and that he should go do his own thing. He left, but just as I was about to step through the lobby door, I realized my overnight bag was still back at the med clinic. Muttering a few things that would have gotten me a detention, I turned around and hurried back in the direction I'd just come. Dr. Olensky's receptionist motioned me toward the examining rooms when I told her why I was there. I retrieved the bag from my now empty room and turned into the hall to leave. Suddenly, in the room opposite mine, I saw someone lying in bed. There was no sign of any of the clinic staff, and my curiosity, always getting the better of me, made me peek inside. It was Abby Badika, a senior Moroi. Cute and perky were the adjectives that usually came to mind when I described Abby, but this time she was anything but. She was bruised and scratched up, and when she turned her face to look at me, I saw red welts. "Let me guess," I said. "You fell." What? You fell. I hear that's the standard answer. Brandon, Brett, and Dane. But I'll tell you the truth. You guys need to come up with something else. I think the doctor's getting suspicious. Her eyes went wide. You know? It was then that I realized my mistake with Brandon. I'd come at him demanding answers, which made him reluctant to share anything. Those who'd questioned Brett and Dane had faced similar results. With Abby, I realized that I just had to act like I already knew the answers, and then she'd give up the information. Of course I know. They told me everything. What? She squeaked. They swore not to. It's part of the rules. Rules? What was she talking about? The royal bashing vigilante group I'd been picturing didn't really seem like the type to have rules. There was something else going on here. Well, they didn't have much of a choice. I don't know why, but I keep finding you guys afterward. I had to help cover for them. I'm telling you, I don't know how much longer this can go on without someone asking more questions. I spoke like I was a sympathizer, wanting to help if I could. I should have been stronger. I tried, but it wasn't enough. She looked tired and in pain. Just keep quiet until everything's set, okay? Please? Sure, I said, dying to know what she'd tried. I'm not going to drag anyone else in. How'd you even end up here? You're supposed to avoid attracting attention. Or so I assumed. I was totally making this up as I went along. She grimaced. The dorm matron noticed and made me come in. If the rest of the Mana finds out, I'm going to get in trouble. Hopefully the doctor will send you on your way before any of them find out. She's kind of busy. You've got the same marks as Brett and Brandon, and none of theirs were that serious. So I hoped. The, burn marks were a little tricky, but they haven't had any problems. It was a gamble in my game here. Not only did I have no clue about the specifics of Brett's injuries, I also didn't actually know if those marks Jill had described on him were burns. If they weren't, I might have just blown my insider act. But she didn't correct me, and her fingers absent-mindedly touched one of the welts. Yeah, they said the damage wouldn't last. I'll just have to make up something for Olenski. A small flicker of hope shone in her eyes. They said they wouldn't, but maybe they'll let me try again. It was at that moment that the good doctor returned. She was surprised to see me still there, and told me I needed to get back home and rest. I said goodbye to both of them, and trekked back out into the cold. I barely noticed the weather as I walked, though. Finally, I had a clue in this puzzle. Mana. Chapter 19. Lissa had been my best friend ever since elementary school, which was why keeping so many secrets from her lately had hurt so much. She was always open with me, always willing to share what was on her mind. But then, maybe that was because she had no choice. I used to be that way with her, yet at some point I started locking my secrets in, unable to tell her about Dimitri or the real reason I'd messed up with Stan. I hated it being that way. It ate me up inside and made me feel guilty around her. Today, however, there was absolutely no way I could wiggle out of explaining what had happened at the airport. Even if I made up something, the fact that I was on half-time with Christian would be a huge tip-off that something was going on. No excuses this time. So, as much as it hurt, I gave her and Christian, as well as Eddie and Adrian, who were hanging around, the short version of what had happened. "You think you saw ghosts?" Christian exclaimed. "Seriously?" The look on his face showed me that he was already building a list of snide comments to make. "Look," I snapped, "I told you what's going on, but I don't want to elaborate on it. It's getting worked out, so just let's drop it." "Rose," began Lissa uneasily. A hurricane of emotions was beating through me from her. Fear, concern, shock. Her compassion made me feel that much worse. I shook my head.
No, Liz, please. You guys can think whatever you want about me or make up your own theories, but we're not going to talk about it. Not now. Just leave me alone about it. I expected Lissa to badger me because of her normal persistence. I expected Adrian and Christian to because of their irritating natures. But even though my words had been simple, I realized I'd delivered them with a harshness both in voice and manner. It was Lissa's surprised mental reaction that alerted me to that, and then I needed only to look at the guys' faces to realize I must have sounded incredibly bitchy. Sorry, I mumbled. I appreciate the concern, but I'm just not in the mood. Lissa eyed me. Later, she said in my mind. I gave her a brief nod, secretly wondering how I could avoid that conversation. She and Adrian had met to practice magic again. I still liked being able to be close to her, but I was only able to do so because Christian was hanging around too, and honestly, I couldn't figure out why he stayed. I guess he was still a little jealous, despite everything that had happened. Of course, if he'd known about the Queen's matchmaking schemes, he might have had good reason. Nonetheless, it was clear these magic lessons were starting to bore him. We were in Miss Meisner's classroom today, and he pulled 2 desks together and stretched out across them, tossing an arm over his eyes. "Wake me when it gets interesting," he said. Eddie and I stood in a central position that let us watch the door and windows while also staying near the Moroi. "You really saw Mason?" Eddie whispered to me. He turned sheepish. "Sorry, you said you didn't want to talk about it." I started to say yes, that was exactly what I'd said, but then I saw the look on Eddie's face. He wasn't asking me this out of perverse curiosity. He asked because of Mason, because of their closeness, and because Eddie wasn't over his best friend's death any more than I was. I think he found the idea of Mason communicating from beyond the grave reassuring. But then, he hadn't been the one to actually see Mason's ghost. "I think it was him," I murmured back. "I don't know. Everyone thinks I imagined it." "How did he look? Was he upset?" "He looked sad. Really sad. If it was really him, I don't know." Eddie looked at the ground, momentarily forgetting to watch the room. "I've always wondered if he was upset that we didn't save him." "There was nothing we could have done," I told him, reiterating exactly what everyone had told me. But I wondered that too, because Father Andrew had mentioned that ghosts sometimes come back for revenge. But Mason didn't look that way. He just seemed like he wanted to tell me something. Eddie looked back up suddenly, realizing he was still on guard duty. He didn't say anything else after that, but I knew where his thoughts were. Meanwhile, Adrian and Lissa were making progress, or rather, Adrian was. The 2 of them had dug up a bunch of scraggly plants that had died or gone dormant for the winter and put them in little pots. The pots were now lined up in a row on a long table. Lissa touched one, and I felt the euphoria of magic burn within her. A moment later, the scrappy little plant turned green and sprouted leaves. Adrian stared at it, as though it held all the secrets of the universe, and then exhaled deeply. "Okay, here goes nothing." He lightly placed his fingers on a different plant. "Here goes nothing" might have been an accurate statement, because nothing actually happened. Then, a few moments later, the plant shuddered a little. A hint of green started to grow in it, and then it stopped. "You did it," said Lissa, impressed. I could also feel that she was a little jealous. Adrian had learned one of her tricks, but she still hadn't learned any of his. "Hardly," he said, glaring at the plant. He was completely sober, with none of his vices to mellow him. Spirit had nothing to stop it from making him feel irritable. With our moods, we actually had something in common tonight. Damn it. Are you kidding? She asked. It was great. You made a plant grow with your mind. That's amazing. Not as good as you, though, he said, still sounding like he was 10 years old. I couldn't help but pipe in. Then stop bitching and try again. He glanced over at me, a smile twisting his lips. Hey, no advice, ghost girl. Guardian should be seen and not heard. I flipped him off for the ghost girl comment, but he didn't notice because Lissa was talking to him again. She's right. Try it again. You do it one more time, he said. I want to watch you. I can kind of feel what you do to it. She performed her trick on another plant. I again felt the magic flare up, as well as the joy that came with it. And then she faltered. A flash of fear and instability tinged the magic, smacking a little of when her mental state had deteriorated so badly. No, I begged silently. It's happening. I knew it would if she kept using the magic. Please don't let it happen again. And like that, the dark spot within her magic went away. All of her thoughts and feelings returned to normal. I noticed then that she'd also made the plant grow. I'd missed it because I'd been distracted by her lapse. Adrian had missed the magic too, because his eyes were on me. His expression was troubled and very, very confused. Okay, said Lissa happily. She didn't realize he hadn't paid attention. Try again. Adrian focused his attention back on their work. Sighing, he moved to a new plant, but she gestured him back. No, keep working on the one you started. Maybe you can only do it in small bursts. Nodding, he turned his attention to his original plant. For a few minutes, he just did nothing but stare. Silence reigned in the room. I'd never seen him so focused on anything, and sweat was actually forming on his forehead. Finally, at long last, the plant twitched again. It grew even greener, and tiny buds appeared on it. Glancing up at him, I saw him narrow his eyes and grit his teeth, no doubt concentrating for all he was worth. The buds burst. Leaves and tiny white flowers appeared. Lissa made what could only be called a whoop of joy. You did it! She hugged him, and feelings of delight washed over me from her. She was sincerely happy that he'd been able to do it, and while she was still disappointed at her lack of progress, it inspired hope in her that he'd replicated her abilities. That meant they truly could learn from each other. I can't wait until I'm able to do something new, she said, still a tiny bit jealous. Adrian tapped a notebook. Well, there are plenty of other tricks in the world of spirit. You've got to be able to learn at least one of them. What's that? I asked. Remember that research I did on people who'd shown weird behaviors? She asked. We made a list of all the different things that showed up. I did remember. In her search to find others with spirit, she'd uncovered claims about Moroi demonstrating abilities no one had ever seen. Few people believed the reports were true, but Lissa was convinced they were spirit users. Along with healing, auras, and dreamwalking, we seem to also have some super compulsion going on. You already knew that, I said. No, this is even more hardcore. It's not just telling people what to do, it's also making them see and feel things that aren't even there. What? Like hallucinations? I asked. Kind of, he said. There are stories of people using compulsion to make others live through their worst nightmares, thinking they're being attacked or whatever. I shivered. That's actually kind of scary. And awesome, said Adrian.
Lissa agreed with me. I don't know. Regular compulsion is one thing, but that just seems wrong. Christian yawned. Now that victory has been achieved, can we call it a night with the magic? Glancing behind me, I saw that Christian was sitting up and alert. His eyes were on Lissa and Adrian, and he did not look happy about the victory hug. Lissa and Adrian had broken apart, though not because they'd noticed his reaction. They were both too distracted by their own excitement to notice his glare. Can you do it again? Asked Lissa eagerly. Make it grow? Adrian shook his head. Not right away. That took a lot out of me. I think I need a cigarette. He gestured in Christian's direction. Go do something with your guy. He's been terribly patient through all of this. Lissa walked over to Christian, her face alight with joy. She looked beautiful and radiant, and I could tell it was hard for him to stay too mad at her. The harsh expression on his face softened, and I saw the rare gentleness that only she could bring out in him. Let's go back to the dorm, she said, grabbing his hand. We set off. Eddie walked near guard with Lissa and Christian, which left me with far guard. It also left me with Adrian, who had chosen to lag behind and talk to me. He was smoking, so I got to be the one to deal with the toxic cloud that generated. Honestly, I couldn't figure out why no one in charge had busted him for this. I wrinkled my nose at the smell. You know, you can always be our far guard and stay behind with that thing, I told him. I've had enough. He dropped the cigarette and stamped it out, leaving it behind. I hated that almost as much as him smoking in the first place. What do you think, little Dampierre? He asked. I was pretty badass with that plant, wasn't I? Of course, it would have been more badass if I don't know, helped an amputee grow a limb back, or maybe separated Siamese twins, but that'll come with more practice. If you want some advice, which I'm sure you don't, you guys should lay off on the magic. Christian still thinks you're moving in on Lissa. What? He asked in mock astonishment. Doesn't he know my heart belongs to you? It does not. And no, he's still worried about it, despite what I've told him. You know, I bet if we started making out right now, it would make him feel better. If you touch me, I said pleasantly, I'll provide you with the opportunity to see if you can heal yourself. Then we'd see how badass you really are. I'd get Lissa to heal me, he said smugly. It'd be easy for her, although the sardonic smirk faded. Something weird happened when she used her magic. Yeah, I said. I know. Could you sense it too? No, but I saw it. He frowned. Rose, remember when you asked about being crazy and I said you weren't? Yeah. I think I might have been wrong. I think you are crazy. I nearly stopped walking. What the hell does that mean? Well, you see, the thing is, when Lissa did the second plant, her aura dimmed a little. That would go along with what I felt, I said. It was kind of like she, I don't know, grew mentally fragile for a moment, kind of like she used to, but it went away. He nodded. Yeah, that's the thing. The darkness in her aura went away and into yours. Like, I've noticed before that you guys have a big difference in auras, but this time I saw it happening. It was like that spot of darkness jumped out of hers and into yours. Something about that made me shiver. What does it mean? Well, this is why I think you're crazy. Lissa isn't having any side effects from the magic anymore, right? And you, well, you've been feeling kind of short-tempered lately, and you're like, seeing ghosts. He said the words casually, like seeing ghosts was just something that happened from time to time. I think whatever harmful thing there is in spirit that screws with the mind is leaking out of her and into you.
It's making her stay stable, and you, well, as I said, you're seeing ghosts."
It was like being smacked in the face. A new theory. Not trauma, not real ghosts. Me catching Lys's madness. I remembered how she'd been at her worst, depressed and self-destructive. I remembered our former teacher, Ms. Carp, who'd also been a spirit user, and completely out of her mind enough to become Strigoi. "No," I said in a strained voice. "That's not happening to me."
"What about your bond? You have that connection. Her thoughts and feelings creep into you. Why not the madness, too?"
Adrian's manner was typically light and curious. He didn't realize just how much this was starting to freak me out. "Because it doesn't make any—" And then it hit me. The answer we'd been searching for this whole time. Saint Vladimir had struggled his whole life with spirit side effects. He had dreams and delusions, experiences he wrote off to demons. But he hadn't gone completely crazy or tried to kill himself. Lyssa and I had felt certain that it was because he had a shadow-kissed guardian, Anna, and that sharing that bond with her had helped him. We'd assumed it was simply the act of having such a close friend around, someone who could support him and talk him through the bad times since they hadn't had antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs back then. But what if? What if? I couldn't breathe. I couldn't go another single moment without knowing the answer. What time was it anyway? An hour or so before curfew? I had to find out. I came to an abrupt halt, nearly slipping on the slick ground. "Christian!" The group in front of us stopped and looked back at me and Adrian. "Yeah?" Christian asked. "I need to take a detour, or rather, we do, since I can't go anywhere without you. We need to go to the church." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "What, you need to confess something?" "Don't ask questions, please. It'll only take a few minutes." Concern crossed Lys's face. "Well, we can all go." "No, we'll be fast." I didn't want her there. I didn't want her to hear the answer I was certain I'd get. "Go to the dorm. We'll catch up. Please, Christian." He studied me, expression oscillating between wanting to mock me and wanting to help. He wasn't a complete jerk after all. The latter emotion won out. "Okay, but if you try to get me to pray with you, I walk." He and I split off toward the chapel. I moved so fast that he had to scurry to keep up. "I don't suppose you want to tell me what this is about?" he asked. "Nope. I appreciate your cooperation, though." "Always glad to help," he said. I was certain he was rolling his eyes, but I was more focused on the path ahead. We reached the chapel, and the door was locked, unsurprisingly. I knocked on it, staring anxiously around to see if any lights shone through the windows. It didn't look like it. "You know I've broken in here before," said Christian. "If you need inside." "No, more than that. I need to see the priest. Damn it, he's not here." "He's probably in bed." "Damn it," I repeated, feeling only a little bad about swearing on a church's doorstep. If the priest was in bed, he'd be off in Moroi staff housing and inaccessible. "I need to—" The door opened, and Father Andrew peered out at us. He looked surprised, but not upset. "Rose? Christian? Is something wrong?" "I have to ask you a question," I told him. "It won't take long." His surprise grew, but he stepped aside so we could enter. We all stopped and stood in the chapel's lobby, just outside the main sanctuary. "I was just about to go home for the night," Father Andrew told us. "I was shutting everything down." "You told me that Saint Vladimir lived a long life and died of old age. Is that true?" "Yes," he said slowly. "To the best of my knowledge.
All the books I've read, including the latest ones, say as much.
But what about Anna? I demanded. I sounded like I was on the verge of hysteria, which I kind of was.
What about her?
What happened to her? How did she die? All this time, Lissa and I had worried about Vlad's outcome. We'd never considered Anna's.
Oh, well,
Father Andrew sighed.
Her end wasn't good, I'm afraid. She spent her whole life protecting him, though there are hints that in her old age she started growing a little unstable, too. And then, I asked. Christian was looking between the priest and me, completely lost. And then, well, a couple months after St. Vladimir passed on, she committed suicide.
I squeezed my eyes shut for half a second and then opened them. This was what I'd been afraid of.
I'm sorry, Father Andrew said. I know how closely you've followed their story. I didn't even learn this about her until reading it recently. Taking one's life is a sin, of course. But, well, considering how close they were, it's not hard to imagine how she may have felt when he was gone.
And you also said that she was starting to go a little crazy.
He nodded and spread his hands out. It's hard to say what that poor woman was thinking. Many factors were probably involved. Why was this so pressing?
I shook my head. It's a long story. Thanks for helping me. Christian and I were halfway to the dorm before he finally asked. What was that all about? I remember when you guys were looking into this. Vladimir and Anna were like Lissa and you, right?
Yeah, I said glumly.
Look, I don't want to get between you guys, but please don't tell Lissa about this. Not until I find out more. Just tell her, I don't know. I'll tell her that I suddenly panicked because I thought I had more community service scheduled.
Both of us lying to her, huh?
I hate it, believe me, but it's also best for her at the moment. Because if Lissa knew that she might potentially make me insane, yeah, she'd take that hard. She'd want to stop working her magic. Of course, that's what I'd always wanted, and yet I'd felt that joy in her when she used it. Could I take that away from her? Could I sacrifice myself? There was no easy answer, and I couldn't start jumping to conclusions, not until I knew more. Christian agreed to keep it secret, and by the time we joined the others, it was almost time for curfew anyway. We had only about a half hour together, and then we all split off for bed, including me, since the part-time field experience agreement said I couldn't do nighttime duty. The Strigoi risk was low in general anyway, and my instructors were more concerned about me getting a full night's sleep. So when curfew came, I walked back to the Dampier dorm alone. And then, when I was almost there, he appeared again. Mason. I came to an abrupt halt and glanced around me, wishing someone else was there to witness this and settle the crazy or not thing once and for all. His pearly form stood there, hands in the pockets of his coat in an almost casual way that somehow made the experience that much weirder. Well, I said, feeling surprisingly calm despite the sorrow that washed over me whenever I saw him. Glad to see you're alone again. I didn't really like the extras on the plane. He stared, expression blank and eyes sad. It made me feel worse, guilt twisting my stomach into knots. I broke. What are you? I cried. Are you real? Am I going crazy? To my surprise, he nodded. Which? I squeaked. Yes, you're real? He nodded. Yes, I'm crazy? He shook his head. Well, I said, forcing a joke through my hurricane of emotions. That's a relief, but honestly, what else would you say if you were a hallucination? Mason just stared. I glanced around again, wishing someone would come by. Why are you here?
Are you mad at us and looking for revenge?" He shook his head, and something in me relaxed. Until that moment, I hadn't realized how worried I'd been about that. The guilt and grief had been wound up so tightly in me. Him blaming me, just as Ryan had seemed inevitable. Are you having trouble finding peace?" Mason nodded and seemed to grow sadder. I thought back to his final moments and swallowed back tears. I'd probably have a hard time finding peace too, taken from my life before it began. "Is there more than that, though? Another reason you keep coming to me?" He nodded. "What?" I asked. There were too many questions lately. I needed answers. "What is it? What do I need to do?" But anything other than a yes or no question was beyond us, apparently. He opened his mouth as though he would say something. He looked like he was trying hard, like Adrian had with the plant, but no sound came out. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry, I don't understand, and I'm sorry for everything else." Mason gave me one last wistful look and then vanished. Chapter 20. "Let's talk about your mother." I sighed. What about her? It was my first day of counseling, and so far, I wasn't impressed. Last night's Mason sighting was probably something I should have brought up right away, but I didn't want school officials to have any more reason to think I was losing my mind, even if I was. And honestly, I didn't know I was for sure. Adrian's analysis of my aura and the story of Anna certainly lent credence to me being on the road to Crazyville. Yet, I didn't feel crazy. Did crazy people know if they really were? Adrian had said they didn't. Crazy itself was a weird term. I'd learned enough about psychology to know that it was also a very broad classification. Most forms of mental illness were actually very specific and had select symptoms: anxiety, depression, mood swings, etc. I didn't know where I fell on that scale, if I did at all. "How do you feel about her?" continued the counselor. "About your mother." "That she's a great guardian and a so-so mother." The counselor, whose name was Deirdre, wrote something in her notebook. She was blonde and Maroi slim, clad in a teal cashmere sweater dress. She actually didn't look much older than me, but certificates on her desk swore she had all sorts of degrees in psychotherapy. Her office was in the administrative building, the same place the headmistress's office was, and where all other sorts of academy business was conducted. I'd kind of been hoping for a couch to lie on, like therapists always had on TV, but the best I had was a chair. It was a comfy chair, at least. The walls were covered in nature pictures, things like butterflies and daffodils. I guess they were supposed to be soothing. "Do you want to elaborate on so-so?" Deirdre asked. "It's an upgrade. A month ago, I would have said horrible. What's this have to do with Mason?" "Do you want to talk about Mason?" I'd noticed she had a habit of answering my questions with questions. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess that's what I'm here for." "How do you feel about him, about his death?" "Sad." "How else should I feel?" "Angry?" I thought about the Strigoi, their leering faces and casual attitudes toward killing. "Yeah, a little." "Guilty?" "Sure, of course." "Why, of course?" "'Cause it's my fault he was there. I'd upset him, and he had this thing to prove. I told him where the Strigoi were, and I wasn't supposed to. If he hadn't known about them, he wouldn't have done it. He'd still be alive." You don't think he was responsible for his own actions? That he was the one who chose to do that? Well, yeah, I guess he did. I didn't make him do it. Any other reason you might feel guilty? I looked away from her and focused on a picture of a ladybug. He liked me. Like, romantically. We kind of dated, but I couldn't get into it. That hurt him. Why couldn't you get into it? I don't know, I said. The image of his body lying on the floor flashed into my mind, and I shoved it away. No way would I cry in front of Deirdre. That's the thing. I should have. He was nice. He was funny. We got along really well, but it just didn't feel right. Even kissing or anything like that. I eventually just couldn't do it. Do you feel like you have a problem with intimate contact? What do you... Oh, no, of course not. Have you ever had sex with anyone? No. Are you saying I should have? Do you think you should have? Damn, I thought I had her. I'd thought for sure she wouldn't have a question for that one. Mason wasn't the right person. Is there someone else? Someone you think might be the right person? I hesitated. I'd lost track of how this related to me seeing ghosts. According to some paperwork I'd signed, everything we said in here was confidential. She couldn't tell anyone unless I was a danger to myself or doing something illegal. I wasn't entirely sure where a relationship with an older man fell there. Yeah, but I can't tell you who he is. How long have you known him? Almost 6 months. Do you feel close? Yeah, sure, but we're not. How exactly did one describe this? We're not actually really involved. He's kind of unavailable. She could think what she wanted about that, like that maybe I was interested in a guy with a girlfriend. Is he the reason you couldn't get close to Mason? Yes. And is he holding you back from dating someone else? Well, he's not like purposely doing anything. But as long as you care about him, you're not interested in anyone else. Right. But it doesn't matter. I probably shouldn't even be dating anyone at all. Why not? Because there's no time. I'm training to be a guardian. I have to give all of my attention to Lissa. And you don't think you can do that and be romantically involved with someone? I shook my head. No. I have to be willing to lay down my life for hers. I can't be distracted by someone else. We have this saying with the guardians. They come first. You guys, Moroi. And so you figure you'll always have to put Lissa's needs ahead of yours? Of course. I frowned. What else would I do? I'm going to be her guardian. How does that make you feel? Giving up what you want for her? She's my best friend, and she's the last of her family. That's not what I asked. Yeah, but... I stopped. Hey, you didn't ask a question. You think I always ask questions? Never mind. Look, I love Lissa. I'm happy to spend my life protecting her. End of story. Besides, are you, a Moroi, going to tell me, a Dampier, that I shouldn't be putting Moroi first? You know how the system works. I do, she said. But I'm not here to analyze it. I'm here to help you get better. Seems like you might not be able to do one without the other. Deirdre's lips quirked into a smile, and then her eyes flicked to the clock. We're out of time today. We'll have to pick this up next time. I crossed my arms over my chest. I thought you'd be giving me some kind of awesome advice or telling me what to do, but you just kept making me talk. She laughed softly. Therapy isn't so much about what I think as you do. Then why do it at all? Because we don't always know what it is we're thinking or feeling. When you have a guide, it's easier to figure things out. You'll often discover that you already know what to do. I can help you ask questions and go places you might not have on your own.
Well, you're good at the question part, I noted dryly.
While I don't have any awesome advice, I do have some things I want you to think about for when we talk again. She glanced down at her notepad and tapped it with her pencil while she thought. First, I want you to think again about what I asked about Lissa. How you really feel about dedicating your life to her. I already told you. I know. Just think about it some more. If your answer's the same, that's fine. Then I want you to consider something else. I want you to think about whether maybe the reason you're attracted to this unavailable guy is because he's unavailable.
That's crazy. That doesn't make any sense.
Is it? You just told me that you can't ever be involved with anyone. Do you think it's possible that wanting someone you can't have is your subconscious mind's way of coping? If it's possible for you to have him, then you never have to confront feelings conflicted about Lissa. You'll never have to choose.
This is confusing, I grumbled.
It's supposed to be. That's why I'm here.
What's this have to do with Mason?
It has to do with you, Rose. That's what's important.
I left therapy feeling like my brain had melted. I also kind of felt like I'd been on trial. If Deirdre had been there to grill Victor, they probably would have finished up in half the time. I also thought Deirdre had totally been going in the wrong direction. Of course I didn't resent Lissa, and the thought that I'd fallen for Dimitri because I couldn't have him was ridiculous. I'd never even thought of the conflict with guarding until he'd mentioned it. I'd fallen for him because he was Dimitri. Because he was sweet, strong, funny, fierce, and gorgeous. Because he understood me. And yet, as I walked back to the Commons, I found her question spinning around in my brain. I might not have been thinking about a relationship distracting us in our guard duties, but I'd certainly known from the start that his age and job were huge barriers. Could that have really played a part? Had some piece of me known we could never really have anything, thus allowing me to always stay dedicated to Lissa? No, I decided firmly. That was ridiculous. Deirdre might be good at asking questions, but she was clearly asking the wrong ones.
Rose!
I looked to my right and saw Adrian cutting across the lawn toward me, oblivious to the slush's effects on his designer shoes.
Did you just call me Rose? I asked. And not Little Dampier? I don't think that's ever happened. It happens all the time, he countered, catching up to me. We stepped inside the Commons. School was in session, so the halls were empty. Where's your better half? He asked. Christian? No, Lissa. You can tell where she is, right? Yeah, I can tell because it's last period and she's in class like everyone else. You keep forgetting that for the rest of us, this is school. He looked disappointed. I found more case files I wanted to talk to her about. More super compulsion stuff. Whoa, you've been doing something productive? I'm impressed. You're one to talk, he said, especially considering your whole existence here revolves around beating people up. You Dampiers are uncivilized, but then that's why we love you. Actually, I mused, we aren't the only ones doing beatings lately. I'd nearly forgotten about my Royal Fight Club mystery. There were so many things I had to worry about lately. It was like trying to hold water in my hands. It was a long shot, but I had to ask him. Does the word mana mean anything to you? He leaned against the wall and reached for his cigarettes. Sure. You're inside the school, I warned.
What? Oh, right. With a sigh, he put the pack back in his coat.
Don't half of you study Romanian here? It means hand. I study English here.
Hand. That didn't make any sense.
Why the interest in translation?
I don't know. I think I got it wrong. I thought it had some connection to this thing that's been going on with these royals. Recognition flashed in his eyes.
Oh, Lord, not that. Are they really doing it here, too?
Doing what?
The mana. The hand. It's this stupid secret society that pops up at schools. We had a chapter of it back at Adler. It's mostly a bunch of royals getting together and having secret meetings to talk about how much better they are than everyone else.
That's it then, I said. The pieces clicked together. That's Jesse and Ralph's little group, the one they tried to get Christian to join. That's what this mana is.
Him?
Adrian laughed.
They must be desperate, and I don't mean that as a slam against Christian. He's just not really the type to get into that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, he turned them down pretty hard. What's the point of this secret society exactly? He shrugged.
The same as any other. It's a way to make people feel better about themselves. Everyone likes feeling special. Being part of an elite group is a way to do that.
But you weren't part of it.
No need.
I already know I'm special. Jesse and Ralph made it sound like royals had to stick together because of all the controversies that are going on, about fighting and guardians and all that. They made it sound like they could do something about it.
Not at this age, said Adrian. Mostly all they can do is talk. When they get older, Mana members sometimes cut deals for each other and still have secret meetings.
That's it then?
They're just hanging out and talking to hear themselves talk? He turned contemplative. Well, yes, of course they're doing lots of that, but I mean, whenever these little chapters form, there's usually something specific they want to do in secret. Each group's kind of different that way, so this one's probably got some plan or scheme or whatever.
A plan or scheme. I didn't like the sound of that, especially with Jesse and Ralph. You know a lot for someone who wasn't in it.
My dad was. He never talks much about it, hence the secret part. But I picked up things, and then I heard about it while I was at school.
I leaned against the wall. The clock across the hall told me classes were almost over. Did you hear anything about them beating up people? There are at least 4 Moroi I know of who were attacked, and they won't talk about it.
Who? Like non-royals?
No, other royals.
That doesn't make any sense. The whole point of it is for elite royals to band together to protect themselves from change. Unless, perhaps, they're going after royals who refuse or are supporting non-royals.
Maybe, but one of them was Jesse's brother, and Jesse seems to be a founding member. Seems like he'd have to make the cut. And they didn't do anything when Christian refused. Adrian spread his hands wide.
Even I don't know everything. And like I said, this one's probably got its own little agenda they're keeping hidden.
I sighed in frustration, and he gave me a curious look.
Why do you care so much?
Because it isn't right. The people I saw were in bad shape. If some group's going around and ganging up on victims, they need to be stopped. Adrian laughed and played with a strand of my hair.
You can't save everyone, though God knows you try.
I just want to do what's right. I remembered Dimitri's comments about Westerns and couldn't help a small smile. I need to bring justice where it's needed.
The crazy thing, little Dampier, is that you mean that. I can tell by your aura.
What? Are you saying it's not black anymore?
No, still dark, definitely. But it's got a little light in it, streaks of gold, like sunlight.
Maybe your theory about me catching it from Lissa is wrong then. I'd been trying very hard not to think about that last night, when I'd learned about Anna. Mentioning it now stirred up all those fears all over again. Insanity. Suicide. Depends, he said. When was the last time you saw her? I gave him a light punch. You have no clue, do you? You're making this up as you go along. He caught my wrist and pulled me closer. Isn't that the way you normally operate? I grinned in spite of myself. This close to him, I could appreciate just how lovely the green of his eyes was. In fact, despite continually making fun of him, I couldn't deny that the rest of him was pretty good-looking, too. His fingers were warm on my wrist, and there was something kind of sexy about the way he held it. Thinking back to Deirdre's words, I tried to assess how it all made me feel. The Queen's warnings aside, Adrian was a guy who was technically available. Was I attracted to him? Did I get a thrill out of this? The answer? No. Not in the same way I did with Dimitri. Adrian was sexy in his way, but he didn't drive me wild the way Dimitri did. Was it because Adrian was so readily available? Was Deirdre right about me purposely wanting relationships that were impossible? You know, he said, interrupting my thoughts, under any other circumstances, this would be hot. Instead, you're looking at me like I'm some kind of science fair project. That was exactly how I was treating this, actually. Why don't you ever use compulsion on me? I asked. And I don't mean just to stop me from getting in fights. Because half the fun of you is that you're so difficult. A new idea occurred to me. Do it. Do what? Use compulsion on me. What? It was another of those rare shocked Adrian moments. Use compulsion to make me want to kiss you, except you have to promise not to actually kiss me. That's pretty weird. And when I say something's weird, you know it's serious. Please? He sighed and then focused his eyes right on me. It was like drowning in seas of green. There was nothing in the world except for those eyes. I want to kiss you, Rose, he said softly. And I want you to want me too. Every aspect of his body, his lips, his hands, his scent suddenly overpowered me. I felt warm all over. I wanted him to kiss me with every ounce of my being. There was nothing in life I wanted more than that kiss. I tilted my face up toward his, and he leaned down. I could practically taste his lips. Do you want to? He asked, voice still like velvet. Do you want to kiss me? Did I ever? Everything around me had blurred. Only his lips were in focus. Yes, I said. His face moved closer, his mouth only a breath away from mine. We were so close. And then he stopped. We're done, he said, stepping back. I snapped out of it instantly. The dreamy haze was gone, as was the yearning in my body. But I'd discovered something. Under compulsion, I had definitely wanted him to kiss me. Yet even under compulsion, it hadn't been the electric, all-encompassing feeling I had when I was with Dimitri. That feeling that we were practically the same person and were bound by forces bigger than both of us. With Adrian, it had simply been mechanical. Deirdre had been wrong. If my attraction to Dimitri was just some subconscious reaction, then it should have been as superficial as that forced attraction to Adrian. Yet they were completely different. With Dimitri, it was love, not just some trick my mind was playing on me. I said. Asked Adrian, eyeing me with amusement.